Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our LBNL Community Advisory Group. Again, I'm Daniel Estefano. I'll be serving as the moderator this evening. And we have an interesting agenda today with an emphasis on group discussion and dialogue. So we're very interested in hearing your opinion on some of the key topics on the agenda this evening. So first, let's do a round of self-introductions, if we could, starting here with Rich, one of our stalwart members of the CAG, going way back.
Right. Yes, way back. So I'm Rich Sextro. Excuse me. I'm actually a lab retiree. I retired, gosh, it's been 10 years ago now. And a Berkeley resident and a member of the XLs, which is the Laboratory Retiree Organization.
Marcos Gondler, I'm going to keep it short. I'm just a Berkeley community member.
You're not retired yet.
Eric Jung with the City of Berkeley.
Sarah Moore, also with the City of Berkeley.
Jolene Ruffin with the Berkeley Community Fund.
John Rudolph. I am no longer with the City of Berkeley, actually. Fairly recently left. But I'm teaching high school in San Ramon and lecturing with Golden Gate University, and I live in Richmond.
Kirsten McDonald, Berkeley Chamber of Commerce.
Mary Maxon, Berkeley Lab. I live in San Francisco.
Jen Tang, Berkeley Lab, and a Berkeley resident.
And good evening, I'm Michael Brandt. I'm with the Berkeley Lab, and I'm also a Berkeley resident.
Okay, very good. We do have some members arriving a little later on this evening, so we'll get started nevertheless. We flip things around a little bit with a starting point on CAG member updates, just to make sure we have adequate time for that and to see if there are any goings-on or activities that you would like to report on with respect to your own organizations or items of note that would help the community advisory group in advancing on our path to advise the lab on various matters. So any updates, and we can pass the mic. We don't have to go in any particular order. I don't know, Jolene, if you wanted to report on the BCF successful dinner that took place since our last meeting.
We recently had our annual gala. We have it annually at the Poly Ballroom on the UC Berkeley campus. And the main goal is it's a fundraiser for our High Hopes Scholarship Program. We had a pretty successful night, great evening, lots of good people there. Some of you are in the room. Another thing that's happening at the Berkeley Community Fund is on December 8th, we are having our Berkeley Promise Scholarship Award ceremony, and that'll be at Berkeley City College in their auditorium at 4:30, and the community is welcome to attend that. And that is our community college scholarship program. So through that program, we provide $1,500 in scholarships to Berkeley City College students, and then support them in transferring to a four-year university.
By the way, how much did you raise that evening? I know there were some pretty interesting items going on opposite there.
The evening brought in around $250,000. Yeah.
Any other updates around the table? Okay, Kirsten?
We recently had our annual Berkeley Visionary Awards. It was our 6th annual, which was at the Berkeley Art Museum Pacific Film Archive this year. Mary Maxon was one of our introducers of the evening. A Berkeley Lab company won one of our awards, Lygos, which is a company that basically figured out how to produce synthetic malonic acid. Actually, you should probably do the introduction. I mean, they're really cool. Which is taking a chemical that is used in a vast array of industrial processes and basically making the carbon footprint super small on something that had previously been pretty large. So, no big deal. Another winner was Caribou Biosciences. Rachel Horowitz is the CEO, and she is taking great strides in the CRISPR gene editing technology. She's down in West Berkeley at one of the Wareham properties. And the third winner was also another West Berkeley business owner, Fieldwork Brewing, which has a pretty disruptive direct-to-consumer sales model that has grown. Actually, they were just awarded one of the fastest growing private companies in the Bay Area. They were number 10 in the entire Bay Area. So they're doing really well and contributing a lot to our local economy. And there was a great conversation afterward at our annual VIP dinner that Mary and Jen were present at, where we discussed how to increase the participation of and encourage the growth of the innovation ecosystem here in Berkeley, and to really put Berkeley on the map as a wellspring of innovation.
Wellspring. Okay, Sarah.
Hi, just a couple updates on some things that I had mentioned last meeting to you. It is still open registration for the Bay Area SunShares project. So if you're interested in putting solar PV on your roof, or getting battery storage for your home, or getting an EV, there are some deep discounts available right now. You have to sign up, though. Technically, it's by November 15th. I've heard rumors they're going to extend it to November 30th, but it's pretty quick. Also, if you'd like to do seismic improvements, the Earthquake Brace and Bolt program has open registration right now, and that goes through November 13th, and that is a hard and fast deadline. So you can potentially get $3,000 back from the state for doing seismic improvements to your house. Wanted to mention that my office, the Office of Energy and Sustainable Development, has an RFP open right now for a project. This is a Pathways to Clean Energy Buildings project. Looking at, we're interested in getting both an evaluation of our Berkeley Energy Savings Ordinance, an ordinance that we have in place that impacts homes at all buildings at time of sale, and then also look at other innovative ways of increasing energy efficiency within existing buildings. So encourage you to take a look at that. If you've got expertise in that area or partner with others, that is those proposals are due in early December, and that info is on our bids page. And then, let's see, just wanted to mention that both the university and the Berkeley Lab, specifically John Elliott, are going to participate with city staff this year for our annual update to City Council on our climate action plan, both goals and successes. So John has given us information that we've incorporated into our report, and will be presenting with us on December 6th. And that is that workshop is open to the public as well. So I think that's it.
Sarah, is the seismic retrofitting for just homes or commercial spaces?
That's just for homes. Yeah, and it's mostly pre-1978 homes.
Thank you very much. Any other updates from around the table? Okay, well, in that case, we will proceed, and we have a great speaker here to talk about biosciences at Berkeley Lab. Michael, would you like to introduce our next presenter?
So, good evening. Is this, okay, this on. Mary Maxon, who is our Associate Laboratory Director for Biosciences, will share with us what her organization is doing, the scientific innovations, and how that's contributing to solving complex problems that others can't solve. And but a little bit about Mary. Mary's been at the laboratory for about 6 years now, and before that she was a senior leader in a nonprofit organization, and that was an short interim period during her laboratory service. And then she was with the Office of Science and Technology Policy in the White House. And she had education and a life before coming to the Berkeley Lab. She's a Berkeley graduate, and with that, Mary, I'll turn the floor over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. And thank you, everyone, for inviting me to talk to you about biosciences for an expanding bioeconomy. Before I do that, I want to start this conversation by saying I would like this to be a down payment on a future conversation. I'm going to go through a lot of information today, and I'm hoping that it's the first time of many times to come when we can talk, because there's a lot to talk about. I made my first virus when I was 20 years old. I'm not 30. So for the better part of 50 years, we've been using recombinant DNA technologies in the United States primarily to do interesting societal problem solutions. And I'm going to tell you a lot about what's going on, not just here, but on the national stage, which makes what's going on here important. First, the biosciences area at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab is 3 scientific divisions and a user facility. We have 670 staff and 733 affiliates, and what that means is if any of them abuses federal funds, I'm in big trouble and my neck is on the line. So what that looks like is about $180 million in funding from federal sources and a little bit from industry sources in FY18. So it's a lot of people, it's a lot of science, it's a lot of money. And at Berkeley Lab, we have a number of so-called programs, the Joint Bioenergy Institute. I know you're familiar with the Joint Genome Institute. We also have the Systems Biology Knowledge Base. We've got the Advanced Biofuels and Bioproducts Demonstration Unit, and our newest asset, the Agile Biofoundry. These are all large programs that put us in a unique position to solve some of the nation's biggest challenges in biosciences. All right, we have a strategic plan. No national lab ever did this. We did this in 2013. And our strategic plan set out 10-year goals in energy, environment, health, biomanufacturing, and technologies. All this is on the web, so you can go and download our strategic plan. But we did it on purpose for implementation, not grand visions, but things that we could actually measure our progress on. Each one has one 10-year goal. There are 10-year metrics that describe what victory looks like when we make that progress. We know what it will be. And we wrote 5-year milestones in so that we could say we would know if we were on track or off track. And today I'm very pleased to report that we actually have a 5-year progress report this year that came out, and it's also available on the web. And we achieved 74% of our 5-year milestones. When you think about very little of the science was funded at the time that we set out those 2013 ideals, this is actually a pretty big accomplishment. And Congress is keeping their eyes on us to make sure that we actually stick to our goals and we deliver on what we say we're going to do, which I think is really important for a number of reasons, not least of which the federal government and the taxpayers are investing a lot of money in us. Okay, the pillars of the US bioeconomy, what are they? Biomass. We are the Saudi Arabia of biomass. It will never be outsourced. We have more biomass in the United States per person than any other country has. We have a lot of it, and more about that in a minute. The second pillar is biotechnology. I alluded to this. We invented biotechnology right here in California in the 1970s. And since then, biotechnology has been a very important asset, a very important tool in the innovation toolbox. Bio, what does that mean? No matter what you're looking at, biomass, biological, it basically means DNA. A living organism has DNA. And what's important about that is that DNA is a programming language. These A's and C's and G's and T's are like the zeros and ones in computing programming. We can program organisms to do a lot of stuff, which you already know because you live in California. You've heard about insulin, the first recombinant DNA product that went into people. But really what I want to impress upon you is that reading DNA started the Human Genome Project, this big federal investment, has basically outstripped our ability to write DNA in an important way. We don't have a federal initiative focused on writing DNA like we did with reading DNA many, many, many years ago. And today, $1 buys 500,000 of those letters in reading DNA and actually allows us to write only 10. This is a problem because biology can do so much more, but there's a lot of challenges to doing it. If we are able to successfully do this, there's a lot of benefits to be gained. If you look at the non-biomedical, we always think about biotech as being biomedical, but I'm here to show you the other side, right? Think about this, $369 billion, 4 million jobs in non-biomedical, bio-based industry, for example. This is an important metric that a lot of people don't appreciate. A lot of this is right here in California. As alluded to, I wrote for President Obama the National Bioeconomy Blueprint in 2012. What I can tell you today is the updated numbers show that from genetically modified organisms, there's over $350 billion of US revenues. This is growing at a faster pace than any other part of the biotech sector. It's a staggering amount of stuff that's happening right now. And the bioeconomy blueprint basically had 5 directives for federal agencies. I'm not going to go through them here. It's also available on the web. And the federal government has made a lot of progress and still is today with the Trump administration, believe it or not, still making progress. And I'll tell you a little bit about this. All right, so transportation fuels and chemicals. If you look at the barrel of oil, a lot of you know this better than I do, 80% of the barrel of oil is liquid transportation fuels. That means about 20% goes to other stuff. Plastics, nylons, all that stuff comes from the barrel of oil. Guess what? Biotechnology and biomass, we can engineer plants and microbes to drive the bioeconomy and remove that petroleum-based feedstock, replace it essentially with biology. What does this look like? This is a plant, and it's got sugars in it, and it's got this chemical called lignin. If we were able to break them down, this is just a little icon, but what it means is breaking stuff down into lignin-derived intermediates and sugars, right, the building blocks of this plant, and we feed them to a microorganism. We can make bioproducts, we can make biofuels, we can make a lot of stuff. We can make almost anything, but we can't do it cheaply. We could create crops with increased sugar, decreased lignin. Lignin is really hard to tear into these little pieces, and so trying to change that balance would be good for a lot of reasons. Drought-tolerant plants reduce dependence on fertilizers and other inputs. We can create microbial hosts to make genetic pathways for any desired product, as I mentioned, and even improve performance in fermenters, right? The awardee who won for brewing beer, that's essentially the same process that we're doing here with bioproduction, biomanufacturing. We're brewing, we're using organisms and feeding it sugars, essentially. Okay, what does this really look like? So here's our cellular factory right here, right? Here's the cell. Here are those sugars. This is an engineered chromosome. I told you I made my first virus when I was 20. High school kids are doing this. 3,000 teams of high school students around the world compete for a synthetic biology challenge every year. Literally, this now is kid stuff. And so these engineered chromosomes create, they code for enzymes that together derive a metabolic pathway. Those enzymes eat up the sugars, and on the other end, you get bioproducts. We actually are doing this right here at the Joint Bioenergy Institute. These are real fuels that have been made with cellular factories. Why is this important? 1 billion tons of biomass in the United States has the potential to produce 50 billion gallons, that's about 25% of our liquid transportation fuels, 50 billion pounds of bio-based chemicals. Some things we can't even make with chemistry today, we can make with biology. I sound like a salesperson, but it's true, we're seeing this. This can result in the reduction of 450 million tons of CO2 reduced from the atmosphere, and importantly, 1.1 million jobs. The Department of Energy puts these numbers together. This is really important stuff to our sponsors and, of course, to the nation. In California, from that same billion-ton report, what we know is only about 15% of the available biomass is actually being used today. I really hope that we can do better. I think California's next gold rush is waste. Biomass. What do I mean? I live in San Francisco, as I admitted. Fog doesn't mean fats, oils, and greases only to me, but it does mean fats, oils, and greases. Those are sources of carbon. Small localized sources, breweries, have spent mash and stuff like that. That's carbon. Municipal solid waste, another form of gold rush waste. Animal waste from livestock ranches, big problem here in California, we get a lot of it. Specialty crop agricultural waste. We don't have corn stover here like the rest of the country has, but we have waste that can be turned into important stuff. And of course, forest waste, which not only can be a great feedstock for making valuable stuff, but also decrease the fire hazards in California. All right, well, why am I up here talking to you? Well, because engineering biology is still really slow. We've been working on it for 40 plus years, but it's still painfully slow. This is what I call the flywheel of engineering biology: design, build, test, learn. Notice that these are not all the same thickness in arrows. We still have people sitting at computers designing their organisms, then moving little bits of liquid back and forth to create the engineered organism. Testing takes a lot of equipment, and it's slow, and it doesn't actually always give us the tests we like. It's the ones we can do, not always the ones we should do. And today, we learn, did it work, did it not work? The opportunity is automation and machine learning. And that's what's happening right here in the Bay Area. All right, why is this important? If you take a molecule like this, 1,3-propanediol, doesn't really matter what the name is, it's a building block that goes into paint additives and carpet fibers. This took big company collaboration, more than $120 million and more than 15 years. Closer to home, artemisinin. This is an anti-malarial natural product. UC Berkeley, Amyris, and Sanofi teamed up to get this $50 million later into patients, and it took 10 years. We know that if we could actually drive this flywheel faster, we can save a lot of money, a lot of time, and we can actually create new value. In California, increased carbon efficiency, decreased energy efficiency in manufacturing. Okay, so what's the answer? There's a bunch of different ones, but the one that I wanted to tell you about today, our newest asset, is called the Agile Biofoundry. And what it really is, recently started as a consortium of 8 national labs. Berkeley Lab leads it, but we do it in collaboration with 7 national labs. And what we're doing is addressing shared industry needs. This is an example of when a national lab consortium sat down and said to a bunch of companies, how can we help you go faster? We have a lot of assets that you guys can't afford to build. How can we bring them to bear on your problems? So they identified a bunch of shared pre-competitive problems. And what we're doing now is solving these problems for them, including process improvements with automation and machine learning. National labs have big supercomputers and a lot of smart people to bring biology and chemistry together. This is something that doesn't happen very often, and certainly we don't always have the same language. We biologists and we chemists, computing scientists, don't speak the same way. We are actually making publicly available standards, tools, and technologies. Everyone can use them, not just the companies who are engaged in identifying the problems, but everybody. We want this to be an open source for everybody. Most importantly to me, democratizing writing DNA. Reading DNA is cheap, writing DNA is expensive. If we can do this, we can make it faster and cheaper for everybody. All right, in FY19, there's $20 million in the budget. This is now a total investment since fiscal year 2016 of almost $65 million. This is the power of what a biological problem shared by a bunch of companies and a national lab consortium can do to convince the federal government, hey, we can actually solve some problems here. This is really hard for universities to do, impossible for companies to do on a scale like this. So it is really nice, I think, sweet spot for national labs. Okay, what's this look like? It looks like 8 national labs working together with a virtual biofoundry. What we are pushing back to everybody is tools and technologies for free to everyone. And what we hope someday is to have, see these little green biofoundries, what we hope to have someday is a network of interrelated, interoperable biofoundries around the country that are using biomass where biomass is in rural communities to create high-value jobs. Not trucking all the stuff to the middle of Iowa where there's a big integrated biorefinery, but using brewery types of technology on the ground in local communities. Okay, let's talk about regulation of biotechnology for just a minute. This is important. In 1987, the federal government put out the Coordinated Framework for the Regulation of Biotechnology. It just updated this in 2017, and this is important because the new products of biotechnology are really complicated, and our regulatory system needs to keep up. So the US Department of Agriculture, the Food and Drug Administration, and the Environmental Protection Agency, the 3 regulatory agencies that oversee biotechnology products, all got together and they commissioned a study, an independent study by the US National Academies to do horizon scanning to prepare for the new types of biotechnology products. And I was lucky enough to be chosen for that study, and so I'll tell you a little bit about what happened. What is a biotechnology product? Typically, people think a genetically modified organism. What is that? It's a corn that's got a transgene in it, or it's a fish that's got a transgene in it. But if you start to think about it holistically and say, what is a future product of biotechnology? This committee decided that it's basically a product through the engineering or in vitro manipulation of genetic information. Plants, animals, microbes, we don't care if there's a transgene in there or not. It's genetic manipulation. And by the way, engineered DNA itself counts. And right now, a lot of big companies like Microsoft are looking at using DNA as an information storage medium. So we know there's going to be a lot of pieces of DNA flying around probably in the future as a product. We could see how these products of biotechnology fall into two main categories, three, but two big ones: open release or contained. We talked a lot about the brewing of stuff. That's contained use, right? Where you actually have something inside with lots of safeguards around it. Over here, open release products, things like transgenic plants, things like genetically engineered mosquitoes. Those are good examples. And over here, we also identified platforms. So you can buy a kit and you can go genetically modify things on your own. We decided that that was, in fact, a product of biotechnology too. And if you want to look at some of these cowless meat from cell culture, synthetic silk from fermentation, genetically modified salmon from tanks on land, open release products, bioluminescent trees, sterile insects, biomining. These are just a few examples. There are tons and tons and tons of them coming out of new companies, including here in Berkeley, actually. All right, and what did this group decide? Well, the new products will be unfamiliar and complex, and this is important for the regulatory system to understand. Today, we have domesticated organisms like yeast and E. coli, right? Brewing beer, we use yeast, where there's one or two, maybe just a few genes and ample comparators. We can compare to the previous 50 different versions of genetically modified corn that went into the regulatory system last year, right? There's 100 new varieties every year. So if you look all the way on the right-hand side, what we're seeing is whole synthetic communities of microorganisms where, you know, their whole population and ecosystem engineering is aspired to by some companies, and they're working on this now and they're funded. And so the regulatory system has no comparators for this. How will it be ready? And I'm happy to tell you that they're thinking about this every day. And the bioeconomy, these are the themes that popped out in the end. Growing rapidly, as I mentioned. We need a balanced approach for consideration of the many stakeholders, including people who care about social justice in the process of regulatory approval. We determined that the profusion of technology products over the next 5 to 10 years has the potential to overwhelm the US regulatory system. If anything, that could mean they need more resources, not fewer, to be able to handle these things. And regulators will face difficult challenges that go beyond contained industrial uses and traditional environmental release, including new players. I just told you that 3,000 high school teams compete every year with synthetic biology to make synthetic biology organisms that do stuff that's useful. Some of those are actually working their way into the biotechnology products arena. High school kids are patenting stuff. So they don't work in companies. They don't have teams of lawyers and regulatory experience. This is something that if the regulatory system wants to be ready, they need to be able to reach into those communities and make partnerships early. All right, the safe use of these products requires rigorous, predictable, and transparent risk analysis processes that mirror the scope, scale, complexity, and tempo of the development of these technologies. Basically means federal government, get ready, because these companies are making these things, and you better understand what it means to have completely new synthetic organisms in kombucha. All right, here's the report. If you care, there's a lot more information in there. It was a great honor to be part of this. I learned an awful lot about what's happening, and most of it is pretty exciting. Some of it is a little unnerving. Okay, back to the Berkeley lab story for a minute. This is a lab-wide strategies slide that our director, Director Witherell, showed this year. When we go back to the Department of Energy, we need to explain to them what do we do with the money and where are we going. Importantly, there are a number of strategic priorities, and what this means is these are things in which Berkeley Lab is investing taxpayer dollars. The biocampus is one of them. Some of these icons should look familiar. Computing, science at the exascale, physics, discovery science and fundamental physics. And then the upgraded light source, right? We've got pretty much a big profile of broad research priorities. Importantly, infrastructure renewal is something that we are spending a lot of time on. And you probably have heard some of this stuff, but it's really important that we articulate what we're doing and why we're doing it to our sponsor, and I think it's important to say it to you too. I wanted to just make a final point about the biocampus, as I mentioned. This is an artist rendering, doesn't look like this yet, but 3 buildings have been proposed for the last 2 years to the Department of Energy for the biocampus. the Integrative Genomics Building, I'm absolutely sure you've heard about. It's going up right now, and we hope to have a smooth occupation of this in the summer. We'll host the Joint Genome Institute and the Systems Biology Knowledge Base, two things I mentioned a little bit ago, and I know David Gilbert was here recently talking about the Joint Genome Institute. The second biocampus proposed building is one that's got a funny acronym. It's at what's called Critical Decision Zero. In March, a mission need was proven to the Department of Energy, and they said, yes, we think you should be able to provide a wide range of biological and environmental expertise together to focus on soil, plant, and microbes. This is an important part of the bioeconomy. It's a proposed building. We don't know what will happen in the coming years, but we hope that as we move toward this mission, this building finds its way onto our campus too. The third one that we have proposed would support the development of sustainable biofuels and bioproducts. The Joint Bioenergy Institute, the Advanced Biofuels and Bioproducts Demonstration Unit, and the Agile Biofoundry are ones that we hope could all be put in there together. So this is a vision for the campus, and I like to think the fact that we have a strategic plan and 74% accomplishment of our 5-year mission says that we actually can put a vision out there and we can convert on it. Even when we don't have any funding yet, we can actually put a good down payment on, we know what the bioscience is that's important for the nation is. Okay, and with that, I'd actually like to hear your questions, but I'd also like to ask you questions. Does this make sense? Are there other places you could point us to talk about these important biological assets, biomass in California, synthetic biology and engineering biology? I'm very interested in trying to make new partnerships to show that this kind of science is really important, not just on a national stage, but right here too. So your questions first.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mary, for your presentation. Any thoughts? Remember last time we talked a lot about more discussion, more interaction with the lab and the community of figuring out ways to make these presentations and discussions more relevant, more important. One of our themes was about getting young people interested in these careers, bioscience. I mean, I'm fired up. That was, the word used to be plastics. Now it's DNA.
Bioplastics.
Right, bioplastics. So questions for Mary, comments, ideas about how we can really integrate the lab and the community around some of these opportunities. Rich?
So let me start with a couple of questions that are, I guess, meant to play devil's advocate just for a little bit.
Great.
There are I can give you two examples where it seems to me that the synthetic biology community is behind the 8 ball on, at least from a public perception point of view. One of them is the production of ethanol and the competition for food, and you know that far better than I do, and even whether that's even a real or whether it's a chimeral sort of issue. There is that. So there's a lot of people feel, and actually if you go through the calculations, which I did once a while ago, you can sort of show that it's barely on the side of net positive energy versus negative energy with regards to converting corn or corn type materials into ethanol. The second one is the GMO issue. Mm-hmm. So let me ask you those questions and have at it.
Okay, the first one is synthetic biology communities is a little behind the 8 ball because of the ethanol food and fuel issue. And I couldn't agree with you more. I think what was special about what the Berkeley Lab Bioenergy Research Center, the JBay, specific proposal, what was special about that is it said we're not going to work on ethanol. We're going to work on the advanced biofuels. And that's one reason why, right? Because the math doesn't make sense. And we're at a state that doesn't have any corn, really. So
No, but the issue is, writ large,
Yep.
you have the problem
that's where the federal money went.
That's where the federal money went,
Yep.
and it's it's, at least for some people, it's clouded the perception of whether, in fact, any of these tracks make sense, right?
Right. So the federal money went to that, and I think a lot of people believe that that was not the right choice. Synthetic biologists took the money because they wanted to hone their craft, right? And so I think when you look now at the food versus fuel debate or issue, what you'll see is the cutting edge research is focused on trying to build new biomass. So I showed you the plant that had some genetic modifications in it that will grow in what's called marginal lands, in saline ground, in drought country. So there isn't the food versus fuel debate. That's what's happening. I can't agree with you more. The perception, though, remains that this is a significant debate. And I think the cutting edge science shows that that's not, in fact, where the direction of the needle is moving today. GMO, right. The synthetic biology community is behind the 8 ball with respect to GMO. I smile because when I first came to Berkeley Lab, I said, you know, we really should start messaging that synthetic biology is making GMOs. That's what it is. We should be honest about this. We should be transparent about it because that's what it is. And if we start to look at all the different ways that GMOs have benefited and not benefited, then we have an actual honest dialogue about it. But frankly, Rich, I couldn't find any takers on that right away because they sort of feel like, you know, it's a debate and we're just going to do our science. But I firmly believe it's an important thing. And genetically modified organisms aren't just things that have transgenes in them. They are organisms that have been modified in a laboratory.
Right.
So I believe both cases, you're right. The synthetic biology community didn't help themselves.
So did the National Academy report address the issue, either one of those issues, particularly the GMO? Did not.
Did not, because we were specifically asked by the 3 regulatory agencies to focus on future products of biotechnology. What I can tell you we did focus a lot on is a difference between risk and risk endpoints. And that's where I alluded to learning a lot. What's the difference between a risk and a risk endpoint? Because the question in our charge was, are there any new risks associated with the future products of biotechnology? And the answer that we came up with is the risk endpoints are the same. What are they? They are harm to people, harm to the environment, and different versions of that. So no new risks, but there was not a specific discussion. In fact, they kept us really closely on task. So we didn't actually have the ability to expound on things that were not in the statement of work.
Okay. I see a look questioning.
Well, yeah, well, I got more questions, but no.
Very good, thank you. Let's go to John.
Thank you, Mary, for your presentation. I have 2 questions. If we were being, say, televised and some high school students were watching, what advice would you give high school students? Specifically, what kind of undergraduate programs and where, say Caltech, Iowa State, you know, whatever you might think of. And then the second question involves sort of an answer to your question about how to engage cities. You know about ABAG, the Association of Bay Area Governments, a group of mayors and county supervisors and others who represent the 9 counties and the 100 and so cities in the Bay Area. My question is, cities are reluctant to develop on green fields, right, like farmland and ranch land, unless there are other constraints. Is there a way to promote a harmony between a bioeconomic vision for the cities as well as, say, holding on to what they still have, maybe of some farmland or greenfield in the area?
First question is about undergraduates and advice to undergraduates. I think the advice I would give to any undergraduate, whether interested in STEM or not, is to try to everything you can to do an undergraduate research project. That immersion, that experiential discovery, actually doing an experiment instead of reading something in a textbook or doing a canned laboratory, actually doing a part of an experiment that is an ongoing research effort of somebody that's real, not a canned one, it's transformative. So what are the best places to do that? I think all research institutions have opportunities for this. They're very competitive because they don't scale. But at Berkeley Lab, for example, I learned that we have, I think, let's see, 15, on the order of 15 opportunities for students. K through 12, there's 5 of them or 8 of them, and there are 10 focused on undergrads that you can do, that students can do right up the hill, right here. And so Jen can tell you a whole lot more about that than I can, but I learned that we have way more than I ever imagined. So an undergraduate research experience, no matter if you think you want to go into journalism or whatever, it's really an exciting opportunity that everyone, I think, should take advantage of. I would also, to every undergraduate or every high school student, say STEM careers, science, technology, engineering, and math. There will always be a gender gap for salary. But in STEM careers, women will make more money, that gap will be smaller. So telling girls this at an earlier age, I don't think we do enough of that. So that's the first question. The second one about green fields and how do we find some sort of harmony between the bioeconomy aspirations and the desire to want to keep green spaces. I am lucky enough to have been selected as a formal U.S. delegate to the OECD, which is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development that is headquartered in Europe, but a whole bunch of countries pay into this. There's a lot of countries struggling with this right now, and a lot of countries are doing very different experiments. Some of them are actually providing incentives for bioeconomy companies to come and set up shop in their cities, and even providing subsidies for housing, which is really amazing. So some of them are actually forcing them into urban areas. Others of them, like France, are trying to get those bioeconomy companies to go out into the rural areas where the grapes are harvested and then thrown away. So there's a lot of different strategies for this that are being evaluated, and there's going to be a report that comes out next year. So if you ask me again, I'll send you the report. But I do think this is a struggle, and we're not the only ones dealing with it right now.
Very good. Okay, let's go to Mark.
What kind of buildings are we going to need as this stuff expands and becomes laboratories, private and otherwise, and products? What kinds of spaces are we going to need within our cities to take advantage of this? And in particular, a place like Berkeley or the Central East Bay, where we have the lab on the hill, and we want this stuff to try to stay local.
Yeah, what kind of buildings are we going to need? I showed you an example of a picture of the Agile Biofoundry. That slide that said Agile Biofoundry, that photo was actually taken at the ABPDU. And that's a pilot scale fermentation facility that many companies have come to depend on because they can't do this in their own shops. It's too expensive to put all that, we call it the heavy metal lab, to buy all those big tanks. What we are seeing is a number of companies are saying, we want gas fermentation. Yeah, that sugar stuff, that's good, that's kind of yesterday. We want to convert waste gas, methane and CO2, into those products. Can you help us figure out how to do that? So when I think about buildings of the future, I think today our technologies are all focused on fermentation of sugars, not fermentations of gas. Gas is a different feedstock. Gas requires different kinds of technologies, and it's combustible, et cetera. So I think depending on how we choose to invest in this local area, are we actually going to be a player in methane or CO2 conversion? If we're actually going to do that, we'll need buildings that can handle that, and we just don't have very many of them. As it relates to trying to keep them here, I think it's pretty clear that there are 2 epicenters of biotechnology expertise in the United States. San Diego would say that they're one of them, but I would say it's the San Francisco Bay Area and it's Boston. And the reason I feel pretty strong about saying we will keep talent here, we will grow more companies here, is that I've seen this with my own eyes. When biotech was born in the 1970s, there's a reason why companies weren't in Berkeley and they weren't in San Francisco. Right? We were, at that time, unsure about hazardous waste, recombinant DNA. Go do it in Emeryville. Go do it in South San Francisco, right? So Genentech, South San Francisco, and what became Chiron, CETUS, all that stuff was second right here. Today, the incentives that have been provided by cities to make it friendlier for these companies, I learned a lot when I saw the Chamber of Commerce What was the question? How many innovative companies in just Berkeley?
And nobody knew the answer.
Yeah, it was a staggering number. It was huge. And so my point is that I think it's the talent. It's the access to talent here. A lot of it is the university. A lot of it is the national lab. There's a new program you may have already heard about called Cyclotron Road, where we allow little companies to spin into the lab to use not only the big toys, but also the expertise of people. That will that will attract companies and keep them here. Some things we're going to lose. You know, people do go back to their home countries, and we're seeing some of that too. But I do think this is a very strong place, and the near exponential growth in since the 1970s is proof of that, I think.
Okay, Janet?
You mentioned that a lot of your research is available for free to private industry, or what does that mean? And how do you control that use of it? I mean, you mentioned you're exploring your own risks in the research you do here. How do you, I don't know, guide the use of your technology to private industry?
Let's talk about the free stuff for a minute. We do license some technologies. Most research institutions that do discovery do this. So let's focus on the free stuff for a minute. When we did our industry listening sessions, I have to say that I knew, because I worked in the biotech sector, and I did hot wiring of genomes from the time I was, a kid. And so I knew that there would be shared pre-competitive challenges around we need new host organisms that can grow at low pH or high temperature because we want to make acids and things like that, right? So we knew that there would be requests in that vein. What I didn't expect is that companies would say, there's no good set of tools to design something, to build it, and then to actually measure stuff. We want an automated workflow. We want software pieces that can talk to each other, and that we don't want to have to buy all these things. We just want one, and we want it to be free. And so with a lot of the people that we have working at the lab, they write code. That's what they like to do, and we've now fully integrated into a software package just that kind of integrated workflow. Just like in basic science, where if you want to sequence a genome, when you do the sequencing, you end up with the DNA sequence, but it doesn't tell you where the genes are and tell you where the interesting parts of the genome might be. So we took that kind of approach and did it for process engineering, the same kind. Build a process of a bunch of little software tools, stitch them all together, and hand them away for free. Because what that does is then allows companies all over the country, academic users all over the country, to be using the same software, which makes everything interoperable, which then actually amplifies the impact of our little Department of Energy investment here. So that's what we do for the things that are free. We want everyone to use them, standard operating procedures, software, processes, all that stuff. For the technology that we license, we make sure we have a fairness of opportunity clause. That means we can't just give it to our best friend. We have to make sure that everybody has equal opportunity to it. And we strive for non-exclusive licenses. We don't want to give it to somebody who's then going to do just one thing and then close it up, right? I came from the biotech sector. I know how harmful that can be. The stem cell world is full of that. And so this is why I'm really excited about being in a national lab where we can actually move stuff into the public domain because we're supposed to. The language that we have from our sponsors in Washington says, don't try to make money on this stuff. Get it out into the public domain and make good public impact.
Let me just ask the CAG members if you think that Berkeley as a city could do more to accommodate these type of businesses, and if so, what do you think would be needed to stimulate that sort of biotech development? I know there's a fear associated with it, as Rich pointed out, and some of the concerns around any kind of new technology, but it just seems so logical that there would be a cluster of these type of startup industries, and we could tie it in with K-12 and begin to create these logical progressions from education on through to the STEM careers. So just love to hear your thoughts about it and what it would take to convince community members that this would be a good idea.
So this is a question that the chamber, in partnership with the Office of Economic Development and the Berkeley Labs and UC Berkeley, have a specific question every year that we try to underscore. And that's really a lot why we put on the Visionary Awards, is to have this dinner afterward to foster a discussion to answer that very question. And the Berkeley Startup Cluster, which exists, its mission is to have Berkeley be a more fair, equitable, and diverse place for startups to launch and grow in Berkeley. And the questions that the answer to the question that we get back is multifaceted. But what the city can do really pertains to specifically giving startups the resources that they need to help get off the ground. They're not subject matter experts. We leave them to geniuses like Mary, who are doing clearly incredible things. But to develop the resources that we do have, which means creating office spaces. We need absolutely more Class A office space. We need more lab space. Specifically more wet lab space. We need the infrastructure to create public transportation to West Berkeley more. West Berkeley needs to be more accessible through public transportation, because West Berkeley is the place that has the most opportunity to grow these types of resources. And the zoning in West Berkeley can be changed to encourage these type of resources. So there are actually quite specific things that the city of Berkeley can do. And of course, in fact, one of our, the first Visionary Award winner that we ever awarded was Patrick Kennedy of Panoramic Interests, who's a developer here that some of you, probably all of you, know his buildings, like the Gaia building. Was just on CNN Business talking about how there is a dearth of talent for companies to hire, for startups and companies that are growing to hire, because the cost of living here is so high, because transportation from further out is much harder. And so actually developing more housing is a critical piece to the innovation ecosystem here. And there is a perception problem about building more housing, which is aggravating, but is a fact. So I'm sure other people have answers.
Thank you. I was part of the team that designed and implemented the I-80 Integrated Corridor Mobility Management System on I-80. You see those signs that tell you different lane speeds and the big signs that tell you there's an incident ahead. So we spent about 6 years giving presentations to city councils up and down from Oakland to Hercules, back and forth. And the persistent question was, what's in it for me? So if the lab were to craft a program of outreach that would explain to the local municipalities what's in it, for us as a city, that might be convincing. And then, in addition to what Kirsten just said, which is extremely helpful and thoughtful, I might add, generally the issues of social justice and environmental justice are preeminent in many people's minds. So if that outreach message could be crafted in such a way as to incorporate these other ideas, then I think it might be, a successful effort.
Is there an acronym associated with that big long thing you said?
ICM. I-80 ICM, yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts here on this topic of bioscience and tech development?
Yeah, can you hear me all right?
Sure.
Yeah. So I think there's an opportunity. You talked about the biofactories in the rural America. Yeah. The challenge for a lot of farmers right now is maintaining their community, particularly with tariffs and everything going on. And a big concern is we don't want to lose our community. Australia has already gone through it with global warming and losing income on their usual agricultural areas. And this one of the selling points of this is this could be a second means of income. In Australia, they were looking for other means of income in addition to like sheep farming. They were doing mushroom growing and so forth. How do we maintain our community? Because they wanted to stay together. And this could be a wonderful opportunity, particularly if it could be so localized.
Right, waste has value. That's a common misconception among the European companies who are trying to figure out how to do their circular economy, they call it. They expect the waste is going to be free. It's not. There's a price per kiloton. So this is an important message to send. I think the other thing that I would like to mention that I didn't say, what could Berkeley do? Procurement. One thing that companies love is certainty. And when I wrote the National Bioeconomy Blueprint, I also began working on what's called a presidential memorandum to say the federal government, if it really cares about creating these new markets, should create certainty for these companies that are going to do the outlay, capital outlay, and invest in all this sugar and invest in all this talent. Where are their products going to be purchased? Can we have biocomposite desks in federal institutions? And I've just spent the weekend digging through the federal government's recent sustainability procurement practices. And there's a staggering amount now, since I left the White House, something like 82,000 sustainability contracts totaling $463 million of bio-based products in 2017 alone. So if a city can buy bamboo curtains or whatever it is to supply for schools, procurement can actually lead to certainty for new small companies to produce things that matter. Mm-hmm. And let's not stop there, right? Also in this area, there's a profusion of small companies that are brewing food. I mentioned the cowless meat, but egg whites without chickens, milk protein without cows. When you start to think about what this means with respect to your sustainability and green footprint, there are a number of companies, I'm not kidding, that are thinking about synthetic biology approaches to cannabidiol, which is CBD, the product that, the molecule that in marijuana has the non-psychotropic effects, but has the beneficial effects. If we could think about decreasing the plants and the water usage, that's a green signature. Mm-hmm. So these are the kinds of things where, decreasing the livestock and plants and using alternative sources to provide 100% pure products could be one, and you can buy those right into your schools. Egg whites from yeast.
Okay, we do need to move on here momentarily. Quick one, or?
No, it's not quick.
Okay. All right.
Well, let me just put it out there so that smarter people perhaps can be thinking about it. Berkeley has a structural land use problem. Many cities do. In that in the 1980s, as technology jobs started to come to fore, and the good old employers of century were starting to lose space, cities like Berkeley protected dinosaur manufacturing, warehousing, and wholesale space because they thought, oh, kids that don't go to high school, that's where they're going to work. We've failed to recognize the efforts of great companies like Bayer, their high school to lab coat program and things of that nature, and instead, our land use in all of West Berkeley is incredibly regressive. And we need to turn that upside down at some point with the recognition that, hey, you know what? There's lots of jobs that people can have in these spaces that don't require college degrees. There's support that's needed in other areas, and Berkeley just isn't there. It's probably a ways away from it. But that's our biggest probable problem is with land use.
Excellent point. And let's thank Mary for her presentation and for the stimulating conversation afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to talk with you. I really appreciate it. And like I said, I hope this is the first of many.
And Mary, aren't we the only species that actually creates waste? Everybody else, there is no such thing as waste, I believe. Okay. All right, so we're going to go on to the next topic. And again, we hope to stimulate some conversation. Michael is going to lead that conversation on diversity and equity and hiring for those key goals and objectives at the lab. And I believe you're going to want some good advice and input on that subject. So you've got the clicker there, and take it away.
And I'll try not to be a lounge singer here. And normally I use a clipped microphone because I'm originally from New Jersey and I talk with my hands. Yeah. So if I move the microphone away, you just know that that's a regional difference. So diversity, equity, and inclusion at the laboratory. I'll spend some time talking about that, but I want to make something clear as we begin the discussion. It is not an initiative, it is not a project. It's diversity and equity and inclusion. If we do this well and we have the fundamentals in place, it represents who we are as a culture. And a culture represents the values, traditions, and beliefs collectively, individually expressed, but then collectively represents how we get things done and how we treat one another and conduct our work in a collaborative, trust-based environment. And so with that as an introduction, I have several questions that I'd like to have us think about. And I'd like this to be a two-way conversation. And what I'm going to do is share with you where we are in our current culture. And Mary alluded to the number of underrepresented minorities that we have at the laboratory and women in science. And we can do better. And I'm going to show you a scorecard. We were the first national laboratory out of the 17 national labs to share our results. The results are what they are. They're not very good, but it's a starting point, and it's a place for us to begin to have this conversation about how do we create a diverse environment at the laboratory, one that's inclusive, one that values the differences between us, and those differences can lead to, if we all don't think the same, then it will lead to scientific innovation and innovations in the way that we conduct ourselves at work and the way that we do work at the laboratory. So the 4 questions for you are, what do you think we could do differently? It says needs, but what do you think we can do differently to ensure that we have a diverse, equitable, and inclusive workplace? And part of that is your personal ideas and also what you've seen or you would like to see work in your workplaces. And to that end, I'd like to hear about what does your work environment look like? What can we learn from one another? And what practices have you employed? And so there are challenges in looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion in our workplace. And one of the decisions that we made, I'll talk about our Senior Leadership Council. We made a decision that previously our Chief Diversity Officer was also the Chief HR Officer. And I would contend that human resources is not diversity, equity, and inclusion, and diversity, equity, and inclusion is not HR. So we separated those, and I'll talk about what we did. And so we created a new position to give that a clear focus as the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer for our laboratory. So I'd like you to keep these questions in mind as I go through this conversation, because I really want it to be a conversation. I value what you have to say. And at our last meeting, you told me you love Stan and his presentations about buildings, but we'd like to learn more about the laboratory, and I'd like to learn more about your opinions and your perspectives, so we can begin to actually have a discussion as an advisory board. So that's my preamble. And so what we have at our lab, we have a Senior Leadership Council. And I'll describe the other pieces of that. The Senior Leadership Council consists of division directors, the 2 deputy laboratory directors, one myself and Horst Simon, and several of our associate laboratory directors represented by Mary here this evening. And we struggled with these words. What is our vision? Vision to me is a future state different than today, presumably better. It's a new world. And we labored over all of the words in the vision, and then we have 4 what I would call principles: diversity, equity, inclusion, and accountability. So the only one that I do want to emphasize is the vision. And we're committed to creating a diverse, creative, innovative organization that represents the diversity of people, their talent, and in a culture of inclusion. And what that means is you and I might have different perspectives, but both of our perspectives are legitimate and valued. And in operations at the laboratory, in my role as the Deputy Director for Operations and Chief Operating Officer, it is my commitment that we function as one laboratory united, in that each of us is valued and appreciated for our contribution to scientific excellence. That means all of us have a role. To do the great things Mary's talking about, it truly does take a village. Sometimes I feel like the mayor of the Berkeley Laboratory, because it doesn't matter whether we could have an animal control problem. We had some issues with our goats earlier this summer, and the goats are used for fire control, fire suppression, or it has to do with a construction project or an operational issue. Those things come to me as in my role, and our role, the role I serve, is that I come to work every day to make a meaningful contribution to the laboratory so we can achieve our mission. And my view is our mission is to solve problems, complex scientific problems that others can't solve, as Mary so adequately described for biosciences. So that's the vision. Now, you'll see, I'm not going to read these words, but this is the beginning of us building this culture of equity, inclusion, and diversity. And so this is the pitch for you, Mary. So why does it matter? And I think you gave us and some insight to that, but do you have anything that you'd like to offer? I have your words up here, and Mary did verify that she did write those.
Yeah, when I saw that, I thought, that looks very familiar. That's testimony that I read to Congress earlier this year. And I didn't just say it, I believe it. And when I became Associate Laboratory Director, I thought, well, I could wait for the lab to set policies, but there's nothing stopping me with our 1,400 people, 650 who are on site, and the others who come in as affiliates, to make changes myself as a group. So what we did in our biosciences area was to decide, you know what, before I sign anything that comes to my desk for a hire, I want to know about the candidates. How many were there? How many were phone screened? How many were interviewed? What did they, where did they come from? What were their skill sets? What stages? What gender? What ethnicity? Tell me about the candidate pool. And then importantly, I want to know about the committee who evaluated those candidates. And I'll tell you a story. I saw many, not too many, but many, a handful, where a department, 3 people, all in the same department, said, oh, this one doesn't fit and this one isn't qualified, so we're gonna promote the internal person. And I thought, well, that's great, but can we evaluate why didn't they fit? You brought them in, you interviewed these people, so they obviously met the criteria. And then I decided we need to change how our committees are put together. We need someone who is not of that groupthink, who actually is there to ask the questions. How do we know this person isn't the right fit? And I'm very pleased to tell you that everyone in our area said, we love this. This is gonna make us better. We're gonna actually, because now you're asking us to do this, it gives us license. It'll take longer, but we're gonna do it. So that's a few things that we've done and why I did that.
Thank you, Mary. And that's leadership by example. I have a number of senior leadership positions that I've been recruiting for, and the commitment that I made to the laboratory is that we will have a diverse recruitment. That means we will focus on channels that perhaps we haven't used before, going to different professional societies, different colleges and universities, and so we just don't get the same people applying. And if we create, in my experience previously at Los Alamos National Laboratory, I was responsible for an 800-person organization, and I had the second most diverse organization at the lab. And I had our HR people come to me and say, so what's the secret? What do you do? What's your strategy? And I said, my strategy is real simple. What I do is ensure that we have a diverse pool, and I select the best person for the job. But it starts with focusing on recruitment. And I have to tell you, for some of the positions, the leadership positions that I've been recruiting for, they're Anglo-male dominated fields. That means we have to work harder to find underrepresented people who are qualified, but perhaps we don't know anything about them because we're searching in the wrong places. I've also committed that if we go through a search and we don't have the right person that could fit within our culture, or for whatever reason, then we'll go back, we'll reevaluate, and we'll restart the search. We're not going to rush to a failure. We want to be certain that we're doing everything that we can. So I mentioned that this is an eye chart. The point behind this is that these are the demographics that we reported. This represents a lot of Washington, D.C. speak. But this was we were the first national lab to report our results, and I'm not proud of these results. Part of this has to do with, if you look at senior lab leadership, underrepresented minorities as the classification here, we have 0 in the senior laboratory leadership. We also have a 0 in 2 or more races, ethnicities. We can do better. If you look at the numbers of women, we're quite low. And so part of that, you could argue, well, is that a pipeline issue? Are we not doing enough? Are we not encouraging, are we losing girls in elementary school or mid-school or high school because they've been discouraged in some way or they don't feel that they're capable? I mean, what are you all seeing either in the community or in your workplaces? Do you see numbers like this where we're underrepresented in some of these leadership and technical fields? Anyone? What do you see in the city of Berkeley?
It's hard to answer without knowing the real data on it.
Right.
I do think, I can tell you just personally, one thing I value about working for a public organization is that it does have pretty good diversity, right? And there are certainly leaders, people in leadership positions who, who are African American, who are lesbian, who are, a mix of groups and identities that would not be the case in every workplace.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that I do really like about the public sector. But as far as, the actual breakdowns for the city of Berkeley, I don't know those statistics. I don't know if,
well, I know, and Sarah, I appreciate that. It was more of just a way to open up the discussion. Before I knew our numbers, we were underrepresented in many different areas. But until you see the numbers, this is a baseline for our performance. We can do better, and part of our objective is not to manage by numbers, but to be aware that perhaps we're not doing enough. Kristen.
I'm not speaking from personal experience, but I just happened to hear on Reveal last night on KQED this exact topic. They were talking about diversity in Bay Area public companies, and obviously they're seeing similar statistics that minority women, people in holding these executive positions are, less likely to be minorities or minority women or women. And a big thing that I thought was interesting that they said was that once you hit a threshold of on your climb to become more diverse, it becomes exponentially easier because people of those minority classes gravitate toward your organization or business because there are people that look like them there. So there will come a time probably where it becomes easier for the labs to attract more talent that is of the minority, demographics that you're looking for, because they just by probably word of mouth from people that they know, they'll know that your workplace is a diverse workplace, and they'll be more likely to come, to register, to apply, to stay, whatever. Which I thought that was interesting.
Well, no, you were gonna respond.
What I was going to respond to is that you're right. We need to build the reputation through our numbers, but to have the numbers describe our experience. And right now, our experience represents the fact that we can do better. But by giving it visibility, we can understand and begin to have an honest conversation with one another about where we are, and then what do we control. We, as senior leaders, we can help create the environment such that we can demonstrate through our own leadership behavior what an inclusive workplace looks like. And part of it is and I'll describe in a few moments what we're doing to have our employees give voice to their issues and concerns and solutions, so we can move forward together and be stronger together, as opposed to being siloed into individual special interest groups. It goes back to my notion of one laboratory, not the science side and the support side or whatever demographic. We need to be one Berkeley laboratory, not multiple laboratories.
So I was going to ask the sort of trivial question, I guess, but the question about the trend line. So this is a snapshot, as of 2016 or 2017? 2017. Okay, but so I guess the question would be, what's the trend line over the last 10 years or so? I mean, when I started at the lab a million years ago, it was, as a graduate student, it was mostly a bunch of white guys doing physics. And that was it. I mean, and I'm not saying that to deprecate either physics or white guys, but the point is that the laboratory has changed a lot in those 50 plus years, from both in terms of the science and the kinds of problems that the lab was tackling, but also in the makeup of the workforce.
Jennifer?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I come directly from the East Bay Economic Development Alliance Workforce Development Committee meeting, which is why I'm late. You guys' meetings are always on this Monday together. But the presentation I just came from noted that, and I don't know the exact statistic, what the points were, but for 30 years, the percent of underrepresented minorities in the STEM field has stayed steady at 2% for 30 years. And so this trend line, so in some ways, the fact that there's any change at the lab is an outlier and good news. I think being part of a public institution that has some of the same accountability issues that Sarah brought up is helpful. But it's a big challenge, and it goes from kindergarten all the way through every aspect of our institutions. I'm still curious about the decision to move the D&I function out of HR, because the first anecdote that got pulled out about how effective to make change had to do with recruitment policies, had to do with candidate evaluation policies and metrics. And so I just wonder about, I see lots of similarities between your organization and mine. We're great big giant beings with lots of different factions all trying to do something very similar but not exactly the same, and we all have to fit together, and we're doing science. And so it was very resonant because we have a whole thing about one bear. We're one bear across planet Earth. I mean, we have, and that work has to happen locally as well. So I was just thinking about the HR piece and that decision, and what are the upsides and what are the downsides?
So that's an excellent question. So we're by separating, when I first came into the laboratory, it struck me that diversity, I'll just shorten it to diversity, was being managed as an HR function. And we had discussion around how can we give this greater visibility such that the entire laboratory community could see that the lab director is interested and focused on this as a challenge for us to be a better organization, be more representative of the community at large. And by separating the DEI role from the HR role doesn't mean that HR and DEI are not talking to one another. What it means is that the diversity, equity, and inclusion officer has a direct line to the lab director to have effectively private conversations, and it's not clouded by HR challenges, because that's a business process. This represents the culture. But so what I'd like to do is just take a pause to move to the next slide, because I want to point out that, so Lady Idos is here with us tonight, and Lady was previously the program manager for DEI at the laboratory. She left several months ago, and as she was leaving, I said that part of so you're leaving, but you're going to come home, and I'm going to do everything I can to attract you back to the laboratory to help us, lead us through creating a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive culture. And so, Lady, I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you if you would like to share your vision of how DEI may be different than HR, and then how DEI and HR can work together.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. Also, this is my first meeting as a returnee boomerang employee, so officially back on November 19th. To your question, it's really broad in terms of the way that we think about DEI. And so a lot of times people think about representation, which is workforce, but I think of it in terms of three pillars: workforce, workplace, and community. And in private organization, they call it marketplace, right? So it's corporate reputation, brand, how you're perceived out there in the world, what you're doing for the communities that you serve. So we have the workforce piece, and even underneath the workforce piece, there's the attract. What are you doing to sort of source and get people even interested? There's the select, which is its own thing. When you think about recruitment and sourcing, it's one thing, and select is really taking a look at the rates of progression from the time that you get an application all the way to when they get hired, right? There's people who are going through the process and are falling off at different rates. So the select part in terms of the workforce pillar is its own thing, and that's something we have to monitor very closely. And then there's develop. So to what extent, learning and development, the ways that you are offering equitable opportunities for promotion, advancement. And then there's the workplace pillar, which you're talking about company offerings. What are you doing for programs, policies, procedures, practices that are inclusive, that are equitable, that are thinking about, how are you having policies that are, say, disability friendly? Is your technology, able to be used by people who are visually impaired? What about your, real estate, that sort of thing. So really thinking about it more broadly than just numbers of representation, and you can look around and think about diversity sort of in this space. But it's really, when Michael's talking about culture, just really the air we breathe. If you go into our lab, people say that safety is second nature, right? And that's just part of who we are and what we do. That's physical safety. But the DEI work is really social safety, psychological safety, and the studies that we've seen in Google that say what produces a high-performing team, it's psychological safety and trust. To what extent do you feel like you have the permission to take risks and to be able to be innovative in the way that you're taking these risks? And that's what really produces a high-performing team. And so to what extent can we produce the psychological safety, not just the diversity, but also the psychological safety and inclusion for us to be doing an innovative work? and making sure that we are ultimately accomplishing the lab's vision and making DEI as key enablers to accomplishing that vision.
That's why it's different than HR. So HR represents the mechanics of how we make that happen. And as someone who's doing a lot of recruiting, there is that attracting, and then we have to, so we're recruit, attract, and then we need to select, and then we have to retain, because we spend a lot of time and effort, and part of retaining is to be honest and upfront about what the workplace is like, and if we're recruiting outside the region, what this region is like from an economic perspective, because I find that trying to recruit people from outside high cost of living areas like the Bay Area is quite challenging. And so that's part of being building a trust-based, innovative, and collaborative organization means that there needs to be what I refer to as a say-do alignment. What I say and what I do, my words and deeds match, and then that begins to build the trust. And that's why with our Senior Leadership Council, I think that's where we are, we have this, each of our senior leaders are working with various employee resource groups. The challenge that I see before us, and the challenge that I will work closely with Lady and the SLC on, is the fact that we have a variety of groups, and my concern is, let's see if I can do this. I want to go to here, this next slide, if I can do that. Whoops, right here. Is that as we have these various groups, the question I have for us is, are we creating silos where I'm only talking to people that are like me and have a similar perspective? How do we do the crosscut such that we're talking to one another about common challenges and challenging one another to think of solutions to be inclusive, to recruit people, to create one culture? It shouldn't be, I'm glad you mentioned safety culture, that's important, but we have a research culture, we have a project management culture, a security culture. I want us to have one culture that represents the way we get things done and why the Berkeley Lab is a great institution and why we have 13 Nobel Prizes, and you can go on and on about our scientific accolades. But the argument that I would make today is, how are we going to make that happen going forward and ensure that we can maintain this scientific legacy? And that's by having a diverse workforce. And that's part of what we want. So the question I have for each of you is, do you find similar challenges in your community, your world, and how are you approaching them? Because that's part of what I'd like to hear, is what suggestions do you have for us? Jennifer?
Jennifer and Marcos.
Yeah.
Well, I'm proud to say that Bayer has ERGs similarly. On a monthly or quarterly basis, all of the different ERGs coordinate, so those groups all coordinate. And in my view, the inaptly named Blend, which is the LGBTQ ERG, I don't know where it came from, but anyway, that's the name of it, Blend, launched an ally program this year. And I think what's seminal about that effort is that it's not only about the LGBTQ community, it's that we're all allies for each other and that we can't do any of this alone. And so these ERGs, you don't have to have the identity that group is defending, making space for, because you are there also because you care about it. And you care about an inclusive environment. So those are a couple things that we've done. And the Ally program is being piloted in Berkeley. Berkeley, because of where we are, was the first to have ERGs, the first to have a diversity and inclusion group in the whole Bayer US network. And we're hopeful that this Ally program will go throughout the US Bayer, if not further. I don't know if it's useful for what you're working on as well.
Probably not a feasible application, but one of the things I think about is going from back of the mind HR penal system. You know, you get recommended to HR for something, it's like going to the principal's office. When you're staying ahead of the game and you have on-site counselors and you have representation, that there's an open door policy for somebody to walk in and say, God, you know, I'm having a problem. I have somebody above me, I have somebody below me, I don't know how to communicate, and you can be honest and open, because one of the most difficult things here in a public forum is to misstep in your language and be judged for it. We're in a hypersensitive world trying to defend and define these policies. We're in the midst of it. We're in the eye of the storm. And I think having that open door policy, establishing that when you come to work here, you're always going to be welcome to come into an environment to share your problems of how you can communicate. I mean, we built a language, a platform to base all of our technology around. Why can't we do that on an emotional basis?
So I have two reactions to your comments. The first was, in my experience, in my previous role at Los Alamos National Lab, we had a safety culture that was broken. And what that meant was we had too many people that were being injured and ill at work. And it took several components. One is we had to be certain that employees felt safe to raise their hand and say, I have a question. I have a question about the work I'm doing. Can we pause? I want to pause the work so we can explore this and be certain that, one, we define the work appropriately, and two, we identify the controls, the hazard controls we need to put in place. Second component of that is that we have supervisors who will support that and enable it such that the employee feels safe in doing that. Safe meaning, to your point, their concerns will be welcome, and that as a culture, we duplicate that on a routine basis, and it's reinforced. And frankly, it led to an order of magnitude decrease in the number of injuries and illnesses. And before I left the lab, what I would argue is that any number greater than 0 means that one of us, if we were all in the same workplace, one of us would be injured or become ill at work. And if you're satisfied with a number greater than 0, and theoretically it's almost impossible not to have a number equal to 0, but it just meant that we could do more. And then secondly, in our workplace, you're right, people do need to have a voice and have a safe place to raise concerns. And so what I do and model in my role is, when a concern is brought to me, I don't judge it, I listen, and I make an appropriate decision to be certain that that person is given voice in a confidential fashion such that they can air the concerns that they have. That's what we need to do. And if you do that a few times, what happens is that people begin to learn that you are going to be listened to, and that's what I mean by modeling the behavior. But it takes all of us to be able to make that happen.
So we have Rich and Jolene. So just as a quick aside, then I'll ask my real question. Does the lab have an ombuds person?
Yes, we do.
Okay, I think that's something new since probably the time I retired, but okay. So my question is having to do with equity and the issue of families. And the person, fairly or not, that the family burden falls the heaviest on is usually the woman. And so the question I have is paid leave, paid family leave policies. I was astonished, I guess, to learn. I have a younger colleague who, when she was, I don't know, 8.5 months pregnant or something like that, and I said, so, you know, how are you going to do this? I mean, and I said, and she said, I said, I mean, surely the lab must have a paid family leave policy, right? And she said, no. And, but not only does the lab, but she had to sort of cobble together, a 2-month way to sort of take leave that was, vacation accrual plus short-term disability plus, I don't know, a couple of other things that, and plus some time off, and plus leave without pay. And it just seems to me like that's, from my outside looking in perspective, isn't really in keeping with the more cutting edge, what people in the outside world do that is more cutting edge with regards to paid family leave policy.
So this is a good example of where diversity, equity, and inclusion in HR overlap. Part of what I'm learning in my role is what we need to do for early career staff, whether you're a scientist or you're in another role at the laboratory. It doesn't matter. We have challenges for childcare. We cannot be our best selves, and it doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman. From my perspective, family stress is family stress, and great employers address that. As a matter of fact, the lab director and I had a conversation about this today, and I did with our ALDs, that there's more that we can do for childcare, and that there's more that we can do to support families, because if we're to keep, particularly the scientists who come in, the scientists bring the money to the lab, and we're going to grow the next generation of scientists, we're going to grow the next generation of every employment category. We've got to be able to reduce family stress, and I'm learning that there are areas that we can do a much better job in. But it's when we give visibility to those challenges through, and I don't care how it surfaced, whether it's surfaced through an equity discussion or an inclusion discussion, or it's raised through our senior line managers or first line managers. If we don't know about it, we can't solve it. And we're learning about these, and we're beginning to address those.
So UC, I believe, has a paid family leave policy for the faculty, but not for the staff, is my understanding. And I'm a little uncertain about that, so don't make book on that. But there is certainly in the faculty area, there certainly is a model that UC Berkeley has set up, and I'm not clear to me why the lab couldn't emulate that.
So it's our intent to have, we need to be able to have competitive, family-friendly policies in order, as we were saying, to recruit, attract, and retain staff. And if we're not competitive, we're not going to be a great laboratory. And we're beginning to explore that. And one of the great challenges for me, and it's frankly a joy, is that what I can do is I can identify problems and challenges. These are really opportunities. It's an opportunity to recruit the best and keep them here. And we need to understand what our staff needs in order to be able to bring their best selves to work. None of us can be our best if we're worried about a sick child or an elderly parent and whether or not I'm going to be able to get to a doctor's appointment. So we are looking at modern, now we're into the HR world, modern practices that will help us attract and retain the best employees. And I'm not an HR expert.
So I think that it would be, of course, great to be able to solve this problem tomorrow, but I think that it's really important for us to have a long-term outlook on how we are going to create a more diverse workforce. And what I do know is that Berkeley is adjacent to two of the most diverse school districts in West Contra Costa Unified School District and the Oakland Unified School District. But unfortunately, there's a lot of failing schools there and a lot of inadequate facilities and inadequate science and technology teaching that's going on in those districts. And so I don't know what the role is of the lab, and if you see that there's a role for the lab in reaching out to those diverse communities and seeing how we can bring the world-class education that the lab workers have and bring it to benefit the students of those districts, and that would, build a pipeline of diverse workforce for the lab in future years.
So, yeah, I can talk about that really briefly. So historically, yes, the lab has a number of educational programs, both K through 12 and post-secondary. And we've looked at our immediate environment. We try to give priority to students in Berkeley, in West Contra Costa, in Oakland. I think Michael mentioned this last time. We are actually in the process of hiring a new K-12 program manager. We've been without one since April. We're actually going through interviews this week, and we're really excited to bring this person on board because what we're hoping that they can do is revamp the current K-12 programs we have right now, which are more sort of ad hoc and not as robust as we want them to be. So when we've got this person on board, they'll now be housed within the lab's government and community relations office where we work. They'll be able to leverage the resources that we have to really sort of look at what the needs are in those school districts, to make relationships in those school districts, to deepen the relationships we already have, because we realize, in our own backyard, there's so much potential. So actually one of the things that we're hoping to work with BCF on is looking at some of the needs in those areas here in Berkeley as well.
Okay.
One I'd just like to add to that is that right now we have a decentralized approach. Various divisions have their own programs. Part of what we want to do through this program is to create more of a unified view of how we organize ourselves to be able to reach out to the communities, because those of us who've been fortunate enough to receive and privileged enough to receive an education and be able to work at a place and contribute to an organization like the Berkeley Lab understand the value and the importance of education. We're committed to doing more. We're going to organize ourselves around that and be able to grow the program appropriately.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very good. Janet?
I just wanted to add a small thing. Our firm, Nolan Tam Architects, is pretty small compared to all of you other very large firms. We're at 45 people, and even a year and a half ago, we were like at 35. So, but I think what's different about our firm is that we have always had a high percentage of women. Right now, we're at about 5/8 or almost 2/3 women in our firm of all different levels, including principals and leadership. And so I don't even know if it was, I think we attracted more women because we had women in our leadership positions, and we've become even more conscious of how sort of unique we are in our profession across the country. And I do think we attract more women, but I think the thing for us too is just being more conscious about who we are, because I'm not even sure how conscious we were in the beginning. And then now that it's become even more, I don't know, just important that everyone is equally represented, that we're trying to consciously improve our minority representation, even though we've got the women aspect covered. But I just wanted to offer, there's a thing that we're doing because we're trying to improve ourselves all the time. Are you familiar with the Living Building Challenge? You probably are. It's an international, okay, so everyone's familiar with LEED, and this goes beyond LEED. It was started in Washington. It's become more internationally known, but instead of just energy as a measure of sustainability, there are other aspects. It's like 8 or 9 petals around a flower, and there's beauty, there's health, there's all sorts of things in order to assess, and there are different metrics for the measure of the success of a building. And so they've started a sort of program that's adjunct to it. It's called JUST. Are you familiar with that? JUST. And so we're just applying for it now, and it's a voluntary program, and there are a lot of here's a little, you can get a little label, it looks like this, and each point has different policies that are sort of guidelines for you to assess your own organization, from whether you have 10 people or thousands of people. And so you get different points regarding diversity, equity, safety, worker benefits, local benefits, stewardship. And then if you meet the sort of, you can then you can have this social justice label and it's a very transparent process, so that all the members who end up getting certified, it's actually self-certification, are all showing what their metrics are and how they arrived at the certification. but you have to be very conscious about the policies you have. You may already have some that already qualify, but it's a way of just seeing how you, it's sort of a checklist, and I don't know, I can forward that to you. It's actually, it's an internationally known growing certification.
What that sounds like to me is that having work be dignified and valued by leaders in organizations and by colleagues and peers, and we need to be able to support one another and create an environment that's open. And so I'd be very curious to see if you would forward that to me. I'd appreciate it. Jennifer?
Maybe it's just because I came from a workforce development that I'm stuck on the HR recruitment selection side. But what the educators in this region are really struggling with is making sure that there's a neat handoff across each layer of the schooling process. And then the final handoff is really to employers. And so there's tremendous amount of work being done on the back end to understand employer needs. And one of the key needs is to be in conversation with large employers about what their needs are. So if you're interested, you're probably already engaging in a bunch of them. I used to joke that there needs to be a coordination of all the coordinating committees that coordinate all of these efforts, because you could just do a full-time job of going to all the coordinating things. And yet, it's really valuable. And a little one that just comes to mind now, Jolene is involved in an effort to make community college accessible for absolutely everyone in Berkeley, regardless of their family background. And community colleges are the institutions that are serving first generation to college. And there's micro-credentials and a number of different ways that those institutions are trying to meet the needs of institutions like yours and mine, for what it's worth.
Good. I was going to ask Jolene and Eric to comment because, having BCF represented here so well, Janice on the board, what a pipeline is in the making right here, and it seems made to order for this topic. Eric, your experience?
Well, this is something I've always thought about that relates back to the recruitment process, which is if, a lot of places will recruit specifically just for numbers, and we know that LBNL is not doing it just for numbers, that it's really being built into the culture. But it goes back to the point that Jennifer brought up, that only 2% of the workforce in STEM is minority, correct? And I guess my thought is if employers and even places like the lab are not investing in these underrepresented groups, you're going to be recruiting in the same small circle over and over, and it's never ever going to grow if that community is not being invested in. And also in Berkeley, it's really good. As a student of Berkeley High School, it's good to know that there is a biotech program that allows students who traditionally would not go into four-year universities to still have a program to go into and enter the biotech field. And I think that it's a huge place to continue investing in and really building bridges. I don't know what that would look like. It's kind of that coordinating thing. But creating a much better dialogue between schools, and not just the lab, but also, across the network in science, to bring diversity and this conversation of equity and inclusion into the spaces. So, like being in the city of Berkeley, the first time I met my coworkers, my office mates, I was actually sitting in on a workshop on social equity. And it's been a really amazing thing that, at least under my leadership, I work in an office full of women. I'm the only male in my office. And we constantly ask ourselves, the decisions that we're making, what is the social impact that we're going to have? Are we taking into consideration social equity, and is this going to hurt or benefit? And a lot of times in our work, we're always incorporating what are the resources in whatever we're creating that we can pass on to underrepresented communities. So always engaging in that component and having open dialogues. We have brown bags a lot about social equity and how our work continues to impact the community, because we do represent the city of Berkeley and we work for the citizens. So incorporating that into the workplace also has been very impactful.
I think that's something that we've really looked at as we bring students into our program is we're not looking for the superstars all the time. When we build a class of students, we look at students that and look at their family situations and say, well, you know, they had challenging circumstances. Perhaps that's why they're not a 4.0 student. And I think that that's so important in hiring processes is looking not all, I'm not sure what you know, where all of the employees, you know, if they all fit a certain type of educational background, but also looking at students that are perhaps not able to go to Harvard and Stanford and UC Berkeley, but looking at students that come from CSU, East Bay, and you know, a lot of our students that are going through our program, we have some that go to Ivy Leagues, they go to the best UCs, but there's a lot of students that are going through programs because you know, they end up at CSUs and different types of institutions because of family circumstances or the fact that they, you know, a lot of them didn't have the support they needed as they were going through high school or through their K through 12 years to be the superstars of their high schools. So I think that that's just a really important thing, and that's what we're trying to really do is work with students who have challenging circumstances and saying we'll provide you with the extra support that you need in order to be successful. And how can you bring that into the lab environment and giving people a chance to come and work who may not fit the traditional type of traditional type of educational background that you hire from.
So Michael had asked about some of these other questions about best practices that you aware of within your institution or organization, or maybe other places that you know about that have really excelled on this important topic. So additional ideas or suggestions here are very welcome as we continue to explore this topic. Mary?
Thank you. Two things I didn't say before. It's the ERGs that I've asked to come to our hiring committees. Every committee's got to have an ERG member. So thank you for giving that term a place here. Secondly, to the point about culture, safety, we have a safety report in every one of my senior executive meetings. And now we have a diversity minute. Same thing, it's just part of what we do. And anybody can bring the diversity minute in, and it's DEI minute. Importantly though, the open door. The third thing that I did in our practices doesn't relate to hiring, it relates to onboarding and inclusive environment. And that is, I ask the hiring committees after the person is accepted to choose a mentor. A third party, separate from the supervisor, that is responsible for that person's success, just like the person herself is responsible for her success. This way, we have another opportunity for new networking opportunities. We have a place where someone can go and say, I'm having a problem with my supervisor, I don't know if it's me, and importantly, it also diffuses the power imbalance. So not that this is a problem at Berkeley Lab, but in for-profit places where I've worked, the power imbalance sometimes leads to sexual violence and sexual harassment, and having that third person in that relationship actually provides a safe space for people. So that inclusive environment, making sure that everyone's responsible for success, that mentor has a role to look out for the new hire, makes, I hope, a big difference. It did in some of the companies where I worked before, so I'm trying it at Berkeley Lab now.
Before you give up the mic, can you say what a diversity minute is?
Yeah, it's so it's officially on our agenda, and people decide that I want to do it this week, so your name gets next to it. And it can be, for example, our division is going to show a screening of Hidden Figures, and we welcome your folks to come to. Or, hey, guess what? Berkeley Lab just put out gender transition guidelines for workplace. Everybody needs to know about that. So anybody can bring anything they want, and it's really interesting how they get creative.
So that's analogous to the safety moment.
Exactly.
Same
exactly.
idea.
Everybody expects it's coming, and we
Yeah.
see new volunteers saying new stuff
Right.
every 2 weeks. We have this meeting.
Mhm. Interesting. Good. Any other best practices, ideas, or suggestions? I suspect we may revisit this topic, and we'd want to see how things are going. And as you said, reporting on the metrics and the progress could be one of the ongoing themes for the CAG.
So one of the reasons why we brought this topic up is that we asked last time, what would make this a bit more interactive and meaningful? And the question I have for you, is this the kind of topic that you would like? Because I personally would prefer to have a discussion as opposed to PowerPoints after dinner, after a long day. By engaging with one another, we could benefit from hearing from one another than having just one person talk at us. Is this the kind of thing that makes this a more productive meeting? Because I'll tell you from my perspective, the conversation here has helped me better understand some things that we're starting, we've got a long way to go, but at least I have a better sense that we're not alone, that there are best practices and we can learn from one another. So your thoughts about this? Is this the kind of thing you'd like to continue?
A quick thought is that with what UC Berkeley's trying to team up with what they're looking at in terms of productivity out of the lab, the biosciences trying to have an open source to just push the limit and put things out there. There's going to be a bifurcation of corporations that are going to be built by people that work there, right? And they'll leave and they'll start a company, or they'll be part of a company. So as a director, you take on that responsibility that you're putting that out in the world. And so this is an excellent forum to say this is the genesis of the core of our values. This is what we represent. And it gives a basis when somebody wants to formulate a company, that they're just not handing over a set of, hey, you run this department, I don't really know what I'm doing. That if they were a leader on one aspect of research that leads to a company, that they're able to kind of bring that to the company. And I think that's an important message that we talked about quite a few years ago, is that you're a big foot that takes a big step, and that big step leads to a bunch of other little steps. And how people view that is really important. It's going to be very important in your field from the political perspective of everything. How profits from corporations and money that's generated to push things forward, people are going to feel like you're shoving something in front of them that they don't want. And it's going to be a hard sell. But if you come with the right set of values, if you come with the right set of understanding and the right people, I think you can make a lot of progress.
That's an excellent point, because the majority of our students and postdocs who come to work at the laboratory for a period of time do cycle out and go elsewhere. And while some remain, we do have an influence on other organizations. And our goal is to have the students and postdocs talk about Berkeley in a fond way because of our values, and because we're an organization where people can collaborate and feel safe in the work that they do. And I appreciate Lady's comment about psychological safety and emotional safety, so they can bring the very best to the lab. And if young families with either young children or elderly parents, if you're not worried about your family because we have family-friendly policies, then we're all going to be our best selves. So that's the commitment we have. We're laying this out for all of you to see. We've got a lot of work to do, but I think it's important for us to be transparent, so you can show you what we're addressing as a culture and a community. We do recognize we're a $1 billion plus organization now, just up the hill, and we're part of the community, and this is part of us engaging with all of you to help us learn from you and get better as an institution. So I appreciate the comments and your time about this tonight. Any final questions or comments?
I just want to reinforce that this, if you have kids that go to Berkeley schools, you're taught that one of the things is safety, security, that sense, that psychological sense of being is a fundamental basis to be open for learning. And so when you take into what Rich is saying, what you just said, for creating that stability for families is really fundamental for growth and progress. And I think that that's something that I really was very touched by, that it was enforced in the K through 12 program. And my kid has benefited emotionally from it in a huge way.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Michael. And thanks to all of you. We're going to wrap things up unless there are any public comments for people not on the CAG. Any comments from the community at large? Okay, well, let's note that this is the final meeting of 2018 for this CAG. We will regroup January 14th. At a place to be determined. We do not yet have a location because I think this building is slated for major renovation. Thanks to Noel and Tam, they're involved in the project. But we thank you very much for your participation this year. Have a great holiday season, and we will see you January 14th, renewed and ready to go. Thank you very much. Have a great evening.